So one of the big benefits of Marxism as a philosophy is that it attempts to be scientific. It examines historical data, it forms hypotheses, and attempts to test these hypotheses. And the method for testing is this proletarian revolution, armed struggle, or struggle in one form or another against the bourgeoisie and the capitalist system as a whole. But this idea of Marxism, this revolutionary approach being scientific, I think is something that we can all learn from. As much as I critique science, and I think there are many reasons to critique science within our modern culture, the fundamental idea of science, that we must observe the world, form hypotheses, form ideas about why things are certain ways, and then test whether or not they're true, that is an extremely powerful and useful idea, and it's something that humans do inherently. As kids, we start doing that. That's how we learn about the world. We come up with ideas. The kid's idea might be, oh yeah, I can run down these stairs, and then they test it and they fall. So they learn. That's how we learn, is through a variation, more or less, of the scientific method. And I think that revolutionary movements of all sorts, whether they're sort of the movement that I like to talk about in terms of revolutionary ecology, we need to learn from this sort of scientific approach of Marxism, adapting our approach over time, taking in new inputs, and changing our hypothesis based on that. That's not to say that I'm saying that people need to rethink their fundamental assumptions, because I think most revolutionary movements have the correct fundamental assumptions in one way or another. But in terms of the actual process of carrying out a revolution, of organizing, of mobilizing people, of training, of action, of the actual elements of bringing people together and forging them into a revolutionary force, this process, we need to be scientific about it to one degree or another, because we need to constantly be testing our assumptions and modifying our procedures to be more effective, to be stronger, to be better. We don't have any time to waste, in other words. And, one thing that I've seen again and again throughout various movements is people trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And, you can talk about that in the electoral realm, where you see people very excited about the latest Democratic candidate, whether it's Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders or somebody else. People expect this sort of revolutionary change out of this Democratic Party or out of this electoral system that we have. It has been proven not to happen. I think that the scientific method has disproved that this will result in fundamental changes. That's not to say that one candidate might not be better than another on a certain issue. That's not what I'm saying at all. Obviously, the idea that voting changes nothing has also been disproven by the scientific method, by trial and error throughout history. Even my short life, the idea that voting changes nothing and so nobody should ever vote. It seems to me that the evidence has shown that that's absolutely not true, and it's stupid. And it seems like the idea that voting changes everything and it's the most important possible thing we can do has also been completely disproven, and is also very stupid. We can see this within the environmental movement, where we've seen people petitioning those in power to change government policies to reduce carbon emissions or what have you. This sucker is running good. Or we see nonviolent blockades over and over again. We see occupations and so on. And people using the same techniques, the same tactics over and over again and expecting a different result. When we have seen what happens, we have seen what the outcome is again and again and again. We have tested this hypothesis thoroughly, and it has been disproven. So I think that, we need to incorporate this approach, which will allow us to, become more, I guess, for lack of a better term, scientific about our approach to revolution, to organizing. And, we need that. Like I said, we're running out of time. Marxism emerged from the Enlightenment, and in Europe this was, the turning point between feudalism and capitalism. a shift from total domination by religious elites and nobility and kings and queens to the divine right of kings to the supremacy of the merchant class and the capitalist class. And this can be seen. One of the characteristics of the Enlightenment was these people like Bacon, one of the pioneers of the scientific method, who talked about putting nature on the rack and extracting her secrets. We see this very instrumentalist view towards the natural world, and that view has underlied much of the modern scientific project. So I don't think it's a mistake to say that modern science, being typified these days in capitalist society by genetically modifying organisms and the development of nuclear weapons and the military-industrial complex, by this sort of mechanistic attitude towards animal testing, towards all these things. I don't think that it's a stretch by any means to say that this has direct links to the beginning of the modern scientific method in the Enlightenment. And when we look at Marxism, I think that that's one of the fundamental flaws, and it's one of the things that led to the sort of centrality of productivism in the Marxist tradition, and the focus on scientific production and industrial production as an improvement over what came before, and as this historical development that lifted a bunch of people out of poverty and created these great social conditions in some ways, while also, of course, creating poverty and leading to more imperialism and so on and what have you. But I don't think that we can overlook that linkage, and I think that's one of the main things that Marxism has to account for and change within its philosophy. And I think that means adopting a lot of the indigenous traditions around a reverence for the natural world, and this sort of non-materialist approach towards our relationship with the world around us, with life, with other beings, with mountains, rivers, the ocean, the sky. And that, I think it's hard for me to separate those two things, because that materialist, instrumentalist scientific approach has the ability to reach a certain form of truth, and that's not something that we should throw away. But that has also underlied the entire development of modern capitalism, modern industrial society, and it's shaped everything in the world we live today. So, there's a lot that we need to throw away from that tradition, that we need to move away from. And we can see even within Marxism itself, people using the method developed by Marx to disprove and reject some of his founding philosophies, like this idea that development follows inevitably a certain trajectory from, quote-unquote primitive societies to feudal societies to capitalist societies to socialism and then communism. So, built into the analysis, there are certainly a lot of movements, including basically all of the third world Marxist movements, have rejected some of these core ideas within Marxism. So, Marxism is based around this idea of the dialectics, material dialectics, and historical dialectics. This idea that Marxism tests hypotheses, tests ideas in revolutionary contexts, and then modifies strategy to suit. And I think we're seeing this increasingly with the development of ecological Marxism coming, the movement, the Marxist project is coming to grips with the reality of the destruction of the planet in some ways. And so when we talk about the productivist impulse within Marxism, I think that this is something that can be overcome through the process of dialectical materialism. Analyzing the situation, understanding that the project that appeared to be a positive project during Marx and Engels' time in terms of developing the productive forces of society has actually led to ruin. It has actually led to the destruction of the entire planet, and that project has no future, at least not in anything like the model that it has been in, whether in socialist or capitalist nations. So I don't think that by any means we can just write off Marxism as a project and as a philosophy. I think that instead, Marxism is in a process of adaptation, and we see this with various thinkers in that tradition. And we all need to shift our thinking in a similar way to reject this productivist impulse, to understand that producing more and more and more, whether through a capitalist or a socialist lens, that the extraction-based industrial economy, whether it is planned or, as Engels said, anarchic, is destroying the planet and will be the ruin of us all, and not just us, but non-humans and countless non-human beings, as well as the mountains themselves, the rivers themselves, the climate itself, this greater world that we inhabit.